Hello and welcome to How Could We, a podcast by Climate-KIC, where we explore the collaboration we need, the lessons we've learned, and the areas where we see the greatest impact in tackling the climate crisis. I'm your host, Anne-Sophie Garrigou, and today we're coming to you from Paris at the Climate Reality Tour. This season we're diving deep into leadership, specifically the kind of leadership needed to navigate the intersecting crisis of our time. In our first episode, we spoke with Marina Gil Velasco, Climate-KIC Academy lead, about equipping changemakers with the right skills. Then we heard from Gosia Reschlik, branch manager at the Climate Reality Project, on mobilizing communities for climate action. And today, I'm delighted to introduce a guest whose insight I've had the privilege of hearing in past conversation, but this is the first time that we're bringing her voice to How Could We. Rana Adib is the executive director of REN21, an international policy network dedicated to building a sustainable energy future with renewable energy and based here in Paris. In this episode, we'll discuss the availability of green skills, the rising political challenges, and how leadership must evolve to meet these pressing issues head-on. Hello, Rana. Welcome to How Could We?
Hello, Anne-Sophie. Thanks for the invite.
Rana, you are the executive director of REN21. Can you tell us a little bit about REN21?
Yeah, thank you. So REN21 is actually a network of governments, industry, science and academia and NGOs dedicated to renewable energy. We have 120 members, but also a community of changemakers of 4,000 players worldwide. And what we are doing since 20 years actually is really providing strong and trusted knowledge, data, intelligence to inform decision makers, but also really ensure that we can really change the narrative and create the spaces for dialogue and debate to make renewable energy a reality. And I think what we have learned over the last 20 years is, and what we're addressing now is that we don't need to look at the fuel switch only, but really build a renewable-based economy for prosperous societies.
Thank you. And so we're now in Paris at the Climate Reality Tour organized by the Climate Reality Project, and you were just at a panel talking about the energy transition and how to make it fair. And one thing that we talk about in this podcast is around climate leadership and how, to make sure that the workforce is equipped with the technical transversal skills that are needed for the transition. One of the first things I wanted to ask is what is the current state of green skills availability for the green transition, and are we actually on track to develop the workforce needed to meet our climate goals, or are there still significant gaps? Where are we now?
So a first part is indeed that there are skilling gaps. That's a reality. And I think it's really important to not only look at the energy transition per se or renewable energy technologies, but really the fact that when we're speaking about building a renewable-based economy, we also need to really build new supply chains, you see. And this goes from logistics, you see, how are harbors equipped, I guess, because we will not fuel around liquid or gaseous fuels anymore, but it is about hardware, it's about wind blades that need to be stored, installed, etc. But then also the fact that renewable energy is we do not only need to look at renewable energy per se, but also the consumption of renewable energy and the fact that the energy consuming sectors are going to change. So for instance, here we are speaking about the electrification of the transport sector, so everything that is linked to EVs, electric vehicles, but also the electrification of the building sector. The fact that the energy needs are going to evolve in response to climate change and adaptation, and we already see this with more cooling needs. We need to account for or acknowledge that we're not only speaking about, I guess, the hardcore technical expertise, you see, on renewable energy, but we are also speaking about training policymakers, regulators, legal specialists, but not only on the generation side, but along the full supply chains. So skilling-wise, we have in 2023 16.2 million direct and indirect jobs in the renewable energy sector have been reached.
And that's globally?
That's globally, yes. And I think maybe one aspect to also mention here is, interestingly, we see that there is a better gender equity basically in the renewable sector than when we are comparing it to fossil fuel. So there is also development, because in 2022 we had 13.7 million direct and indirect jobs. Now, I would like, however, and I think that's really a blind spot in our discussions very often, to remind ourselves that when you're looking at the energy workforce in general, fossil fuel, nuclear, renewables, integrated, this only represents 1.8% of the global workforce. We basically need to acknowledge for the fact that when we are looking at job creation, we cannot only look at the direct jobs in the energy sector. We need to look at jobs that have been created, because energy is a driver for economic development and industrialization, in particular in developing countries. So I think sometimes we have a too narrow discussion on this topic.
What do you think of the saying that says, like, in the future, every job is going to be a climate job?
I would probably not formulate it like this and say like a climate job. I think there are planetary crises. And these days we're living then, there are economic crises, there are security increasing conflict, you see. And so there is a real question how we actually build strong and resilient economies and society that can cope with those. So I think it is more about how do we integrate sustainability in a broader sense, but also resilience in a broader sense into all our economic activities. In policy making, in industrial activities, in businesses, in tourism, you see, like in how we manage the cities, in transport. And I think this is basically a part where the metrics and the key performance indicators need to change, just because we are living in another area where there is resource constraints, there is climate vulnerability that is increasing and already a reality, but also because there are possibilities to build basically economies that serve people in a much more sustainable and equitable way, and there is no reason to not move in that direction. It requires a systems change, but it is possible.
Thank you. And I think it goes to my next questions, because to build those economies that are more resilient and those societies that are more resilient, of course, we're going to need a lot of technical skills, but it is also a lot about transversal skills. So skills like you talked about resilience, about like collaboration, listening, like those are skills like the leaders, the people who are leading the climate action are going to need. How do you see those soft skills contributing to effective climate leadership, and how can we better cultivate them in the workforce?
Interestingly, I think that this separation of hard skills and soft skills is already not helping us. You see, that's the first part. We need to acknowledge for the fact that when we're moving basically to a more sustainable system, requires a stronger integration of the different aspects which we have. I'll take a concrete example from the energy system. We're moving from a fossil fuel-based system where we're basically depending on few producing and exporting countries, and where we're shipping around fuels in the world. And from here we're moving to an energy system where we have localized generation, where we will have regional infrastructure, so grid storage, but where we also have energy consumers who are not only consuming energy but will also become energy producers. So it already showed that we are moving to a system that is not only unidirectional but much more integrated. And unfortunately, even when we're speaking about so-called hard skills, we observe that the expert discussions are happening in a very siloed way between the generation, between grids, between the storage and flexibility, and then also in the energy consuming sectors, where very often looking at the fuel is not even a discussion, you see, because they assume that the electricity will be there or the fuel will be there. So this actually showed that we need to build new ways of integrating those ecosystems. I think one learning here, and I would actually say to some extent it is soft skills, because we need to learn that we're looking at the same things, but our perspective is going to very much shape how we look at it, that our metrics are different, that our key performance indicator and the agenda is different. So this is something that is important. This stepping back on ourselves, that's probably something we need to train people. But the other part part also is that in our training and the skilling parts, we need to basically create the spaces where you can bring those ecosystems and the experts together and build thought leadership at the nexus topics between, for instance, supply and the energy consuming sector, transport, building, industry, agriculture, etc. But then also clearly integrating basically those players in more strategic energy planning. I think it is about skilling, but it's also about creating the spaces where we deliberately bring some of our blind spots together and players who are reflecting those blind spots.
So you just spoke at a panel about the need to reposition the energy transition debate. I thought it was really, really interesting. And like we have to place all our discussion around like climate, around the energy transition in the current context. And today there is a rising political challenges, the increasing influence of the far right, and it is affecting the energy transition. Despite the prices going down and everything, how do you think leaderships need to evolve in response to that?
By first changing our narrative. I think this is really important. Also acknowledging that not everything is a renewable discussion or a climate discussion. It is something which we need to always have in our mind, I think, and keep in mind that this is the ultimate goal we need to address, but rather really connecting with players by acknowledging what their agenda is and what their concerns are. So I think this is one part, and especially when we're speaking about right-wing governments, there is a question of concerns in a part of the population that feels excluded. And then I would say it is about understanding what these concerns are, but then very practically bringing basically the solutions that do exist to address those concerns. Just some examples. Renewable energy and energy efficiency has been one of the key drivers to address energy security concerns in Europe in response to the Ukraine war, but is also a possibility to directly reduce the energy bills of households. That's something that is not sufficiently basically taken into account. Agri-photovoltaics is a direct technological solution that addresses some of the farmers' concerns, for instance, which is about we need to increase our benefits, we need to diversify benefit income, but we also need to adapt our activities to climate change. And so solar PV is a way of reducing the evaporation. When we're looking at some developing countries, we already see it. So I take the example of Pakistan, we see it in South Africa, that, for instance, high electricity prices or load shedding in many countries or energy access is actually not addressed by centralized fossil fuel-based energy systems, but solar rooftop brings a direct solution that is very often more economic. And I just think this is basically a part where I would say is better understand the concerns and bring the solutions in response to those concerns, not only with facts and figures, but also with good stories and authentic voices, but not forgetting that the transitions we're speaking about are not transitions that can be managed by only the individuals. We really need to have the right policy and regulatory frameworks and political leadership, but political leaders also listen to the influence of citizens. So I just think there's really a work to do on connecting basically these two ends.
Yeah, and it's funny because you talk now about like showing the stories, and that's one thing at Climate-KIC that we're really, really working on is about demonstration. We were working with one of the cooperative in Ireland, farming cooperative, and the person I interviewed said, we need demonstration of what is possible. Like farmers need to see that things are happening and that things can work for them, and I think that's really a very important part. Is there anything right now that you would like listeners to engage with regarding REN 21? Is there anything right now that you're working on that can be interesting for our listeners?
We have launched an unbranded campaign which is called Reboot the World with Renewable Energy. We specifically look at the socio-economic benefits of renewables. Strong, authentic voices. This platform is really there so that you can directly contribute your stories, but we also invite you to use those stories, partner here. What we're doing from REN 21 side is then also specifically positioning them in media, because we clearly have the feedback that there is a lack of good stories and voices that can be used. And I think we cannot underestimate how important it is to address basically misinformation, disinformation through media, but then also use it to inspire for change. So this is one part. The other one is very clearly, we think that stories alone is not enough. You need facts and figures to inform and provide really the evidence to inform decision makers and convince them also. Here we are producing every year the Renewables Global Status Report that is also a crowdsourced effort. So the opportunity for all of your listeners basically to contribute data, statistics, and ensure that the local and national and regional and sectoral realities are well reflected in the global reference project.
Thank you, and we'll leave all of those links in the show notes and all of the contact information as well. We're going to the end of the podcast. Maybe you can hear in the background there's a lot of people that are leaving their workshops, but I have one question left for you that I ask every single person since 3 years, which is how could we build a sustainable, just and resilient future for all?
You know, this is a part where I'm just going to speak about just versus equitable. Even though I think it is really important to have justice, very clearly, I actually think that sometimes justice brings it to managing the historic part and not having the forward-looking part. So what I would like to see is a sustainable, equitable development for all. What brings us there? I mean, I say this very often. I really invite everybody to leave your comfort zone at least once a week. Talk to people you don't talk to normally. Take another way to work or to the kindergarten or whatever, and then you do. Instead of cycling, take the bus or whatever. You see, to change the perspectives, because I think very often we're kind of blind spotted, and this is really a way to increase compassion and empathy. And then the other one, you see, like coming from the renewable side, I really invite you to see where does my energy come from? Check your bill. What possibilities do I have to move to a green energy provider? Can I actually alone or with neighbors or in the community engage basically in renewable energy projects? Because ultimately we know that fossil fuel is responsible for climate change. This is actually what the problem we need to tackle is phase out fossil fuel and move to a flexible, efficient and renewable-based energy system.
Thank you so much, Rana, for coming on How Could We? It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Likewise.
That's it for today's episode of How Could We? A huge thank you to Rana Adib for sharing her expertise and for giving us such a crucial perspective on the intersection of leadership, policy, and renewable energy. If today's discussion sparked new thoughts or inspired you, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on social media or leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps more people to discover the show. And if you're passionate about driving climate action and want to build the skills to lead transformative change, check out the Climate-KIC Academy. It's designed for change makers like you, equipping leaders across industries with the knowledge and network to accelerate climate solutions. You'll find the link to the website as well as a form to register your interest in the show notes. And of course, a lot of the links related to REN21 as well. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, keep questioning, keep collaborating, and keep pushing for the leadership we need.